Well, I have a kind of fucked up conspiracy to present today.
Oh.
I have a conspiracy that, not many people are going to like to hear. I went down a real Wikipedia rabbit hole when I was researching this yesterday, and I found some really fun, silly facts about our country's activity at the end of World War II.
Ooh.
So, just for a little recap, how familiar are you with how World War II ended and what happened to the Nazis after the war ended?
I'm relatively familiar. Yeah.
So, effectively, at the end of World War II, after the Battle of Berlin, where Hitler and all his associates supposedly basically killed themselves in this bunker, right? It wasn't really a rumor, but it was long said that a lot of the surviving Nazis fled to South America.
Right.
A lot of them, Argentina specifically, but all over South America. Some of them went to other places. There was one really notable general who went to Syria and lived his life there. But it's publicly only reported that a couple hundred ended up ever going to South America. And ever since the end of World War II, United States intelligence services have kind of feigned ignorance to the whereabouts of all these surviving Nazi officials, right? I'm talking it's not just privates and random soldiers that were just battling. No, the actual high-ranking officials and generals and lieutenants and doctors and people commanding concentration camps fled to South America. And my theory today is that our intelligence agencies, our version of the CIA, which at the time was called the CIC, the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, protected a ton of senior Nazi officials and helped them flee Europe and get to South America in exchange for two things. A, the information that they gained during the war, which was very valuable, and B, anti-communist efforts in South America, right?
Okay.
Now, the reason that I believe this is because we have actually publicly admitted to doing this with one escaped individual, and we've only ever publicly acknowledged doing this one time. But there's a bunch of higher ranking people than the one person we claim to have helped who somehow managed to flee to South America and live out the rest of their lives in relative peace, despite having been sentenced to death in absentia in various countries and being tried in absentia during the Nuremberg trials, right? Now, before I talk to you about the person that we're confirmed to have helped out in World War II, I think the important thing is to think, what benefit do we have by collaborating with these ex-Nazi officials, right?
Right.
The real valuable thing that I think in a lot of my, when I was researching this theory, I didn't see this ever really touched on, is when you have a fled Nazi who has been sentenced to death in multiple countries, you could drop him off on the doorstep of probably half of the countries in Europe, and they would execute him the same day.
Yeah.
That guy's going to do whatever the fuck you tell him to do in exchange for not making that happen, right?
Yeah.
And there was actually an individual named Klaus Barbie who was known as the Butcher of Lyon for torturing his prisoners, and he was a very high-ranking Nazi official. However, he spent the remainder of his years trafficking drugs with cartels in South America and only died in, I believe it was the early 1990s, right? Now, this guy right here, Klaus Barbie, was a German officer of something called the Schutzstaffel who worked in France during World War II. He became known as the Butcher of Lyon for having personally tortured prisoners, primarily Jews and members of the French resistance, as the head of the Gestapo in Lyon. After the war, the United States intelligence services actually employed him for his anti-communist efforts and even aided his escape to Bolivia, where he advised the dictatorial regime on how to repress opposition through torture. In 1983, decades after the end of the war, we finally officially acknowledged this and apologized to France for helping him escape, because at the time, France had sentenced him to death. They knew who he was. This was not like an anonymous person. We had all of the Nazis' records. We knew who all their generals were and everything. This guy was sentenced to death in France, and knowing that, we helped him escape. And he stayed in France undiscovered with our help for over 2 decades post-war. He wasn't even discovered until 1972. He played a major role in a coup that happened in the 1980s, and he did, a shitload of anti-communist stuff in exchange for our protection. Eventually, in 1983, he was extradited to France and sentenced to life in prison. So we kind of fucked everybody over in that scenario. We fucked over France by protecting the guy they wanted really bad. And then in the end, we fucked over the guy we protected too, because that's kind of how our country works. Now, this guy is the only individual that we publicly admit to doing this for. But there's way more. I'm going to show you another guy who's even higher ranking than him, who actually did escape to South America and just live out his life and chill.
Okay.
Now, this is a real crazy line I want to highlight here. So the French had discovered that Barbie was in U.S. hands. Having sentenced him to death in absentia for war crimes, they made a plea to the U.S. High Commissioner for Germany, John J. McCloy, to hand him over for execution. However, McCloy refused. So even when it was public knowledge, France had known for decades that we were protecting this guy, and we were just like, no. Instead, the CIC helped him flee to Bolivia, assisted by ratlines organized by the U.S. intelligence services. Now, what are ratlines? This is how everyone got out in World War II. This is how all the Nazis escaped, right? Obviously, these dudes can't just go board a flight to Argentina or South America and go chill.
Right.
Now, the ratlines were systems of escape routes used by German Nazis and other fascists to flee Europe from 1945 onwards in the aftermath of World War II. These routes primarily led towards havens in South America, particularly Argentina, but also Brazil, Chile, and Paraguay. Some escapees also settled at the various transfer points of the ratlines. Now, starting in 1947, the U.S. utilized this network and an official at the International Refugee Organization to help Klaus Barbie flee to Bolivia, which is where we ended up dumping him. Decades after the end of World War II, the ratlines are still a subject of investigation and cultural interest. We're not the ones investigating it.
Right.
It is a lot of other European countries. We know what's up with these ratlines. We just don't really publicly admit it.
Right.
Now, who is another very notable individual who escaped to South America? Arguably, I would say this is probably the most famous escaped Nazi, Josef Mengele. I don't know if I said his name right. He is named the Angel of Death. And this guy was known for conducting extreme human experiments on living patients at Auschwitz. He was pulling children out and injecting drugs into their eyes and shit and documenting all the results. We could spend a whole episode talking about the crazy experiments that this guy did, but I think we would get age restricted.
Yeah.
Now, Mengele's name was mentioned several times during the Nuremberg trials in the mid-1940s, but the Allied forces claimed to believe that he was probably already dead. His family, of course, was also claiming that he had died. However, in 1958, an author of a book portraying Anne Frank's experience during the Holocaust was mailed a letter from someone who claimed to be a maid in the Mengele household in South America and had been told that her Mengele, the father of Josef Mengele, her apparently said that his son was still alive in South America. The author of this book who received the letter wrote to the state prosecutor and provided this info, and an arrest warrant was issued for him in February 1959. Still, people were like, oh, we're not really sure if he was alive. Years later, the CIA released all of our documents on the Holocaust, and it was finally revealed. After the war, Mengele fled to Argentina in July 1949, allegedly assisted by a network of former SS members. I think it makes more sense that we probably protected him because at the time, our understanding of medicine was much different in the early to mid 1900s than it is now.
Right.
And regardless of the reprehensible things this guy did, the research he did was probably invaluable at the time and stuff that we can't replicate those crazy human experiments.
No.
But I'd imagine our security services, the CIC at the time, was probably interested in that data.
Genuinely, the things this guy was doing, we could not get away with testing on animals today.
We can't do that.
So this, while it was horrific, the science...
And we did crazy shit in that era following the war. Remember, we were dosing prisoners in our own country unknowingly with acid, telling them it was just some normal placebo drug and then documenting the effects after throwing them in a cell for a day. You know? This guy did way worse shit than that, though. Like, we more than likely wanted this guy's data. Now, he lived a normal life outside of custody all the way until he drowned in 1979. He even survived assassination attempts by both the West German government and Mossad. He was pursued in South America. For some reason, we never came to get him, though. Other authorities came to get him, even though we spent the whole war spending thousands of lives, countless dollars, and years fighting the Nazis just to, in the end, be like, they're probably dead. Doesn't really make sense, you know? He wasn't even positively identified until 1992 after DNA analysis. For that long, 50 years after the war, people still didn't know that he made it out. Now, does it really make sense for us to fight the whole war, get to the very end of the war, and then just assume that all the Nazis died?
No.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I think it's much more plausible that we assisted a lot of those higher end officials to get information from them. And it's documented that we used Klaus Barbie in anti-communist efforts and destabilizing communist regimes in South America and other parts of the world. There's no way he was the only guy we did that with.
Yeah.
We did crazy shit in our anti-communist efforts. And also the Nazis genuinely hated communists as well, because Russia was the turning point of World War II. Right. As soon as they tried to invade Russia is when Germany started, the tides turned.
Yeah.
Germany started getting fucked up at that point. So they don't like communists. You know, they don't want to fuck with the Soviet Union, Stalin, all those guys. Fuck them. Mm-hmm. Fuck the communists. They don't believe in that system. They definitely don't believe everyone's equal.
No.
So that's my theory. You know, I think we helped out a lot more high-ranking Nazi officials than we ever publicly admit. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of weird that for a lot of these allegedly dead high-ranking Nazi officials, we only have small pieces of evidence. Like Hitler, for example, we only ever had dental records. Right. We found teeth.
Yeah,
that's weird to me. That's just, there's no way we wouldn't confirm that death.
Right.
There's no fucking way.
No.
There's no way. I also, while I was doing research for this theory, I stumbled upon what might be the most fascinating and hilarious war figure I've ever found in my life. A guy who, like, an unbelievable individual.
Okay.
So, in the early stages of World War II, Germany, the German Nazis had a high-ranking official, so high-ranking that Hitler even, gave him the title of Deputy Führer at one point, right under him, named Rudolf Hess.
Okay.
And Rudolf was someone that was widely viewed as kind of insane by all his colleagues. Like, all of his other generals and people he worked with viewed him as increasingly insane as the war went on. And one day, in the middle of the night, he didn't tell anyone he's going to do this. He didn't indicate doing this to anyone. Rudolf decided to get on a plane, fly to Scotland, and eject from the plane solo in the middle of the night and parachute into Scotland in an attempt to single-handedly negotiate the United Kingdom backing out of World War II. He did not tell the UK he was coming. He didn't tell anyone, not even his own colleagues, that he was coming. He just jumped in a plane and ejected and just parachuted in. Now, by the start of World War II, Hess was already sidelined from most important decision-making because people thought he was insane. They genuinely didn't trust him. On the 10th of May, 1941, Hess made a solo flight to Scotland where he hoped to arrange peace talks with the Duke of Hamilton, who he believed to be a prominent opponent of the British government's war policy. The British authorities immediately arrested Hess on his arrival and held him in custody until the end of the war, where he was transferred to Germany to stand trial at the 1946 Nuremberg trials. During much of his trial, he claimed to be suffering from amnesia, but he later admitted to the tribunal that this was a ruse.
Oh.
Now, this guy, because he chose to parachute out of the plane solo and get himself arrested, spent the entire rest of his life in a prison. He died in 1987 at the age of 93. He finally hung himself in his prison cell after spending 40 years there. And for the last 20 years of Rudolph's sentence, he was alone in his prison. He was the only captive in the entire prison. It was an old World War II era prison that was specifically designed only for captured people for the Nuremberg trials. And the last, other person that was in there with him died in, I don't remember if he died or got released, in the 60s. So this guy was alone for the last 2 decades of his life. There's actually a book that the lone prison guard who was assigned to watch him wrote about this guy's life. That seems kind of interesting, and I kind of want to read it.
Yeah.
Now that I found
sounds
that.
very interesting.
But he was apparently a madman, and literally up until the end of his life, he still supported the Nazi ideals. He was still he never once admitted fault. He had reviews of his case where he could have been let out, and he would go to court and just be like, nope, fuck yeah, I'm still with this shit. Nope, all the way to his death. He wrote that shit out. And he also was kind of a funny looking guy. Hold on, let me put up. Look at this fucking dude. Kind of looks like Frankenstein.
A little bit, yeah.
Dude, that eyebrow's nuts.
I was just going to say, those are some thick eyebrows, yeah.
Nuts. Imagine this guy solo parachuting in and just walking up to the Duke's crib yo, I'm here to negotiate peace.
Right?
Like that.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.